On today's episode, we'll be sharing stories involving a strange Bigfoot or Dogman-like creature, a lady in white, an invisible predator-like entity, and mysterious vanishings in the Cuban jungle. These stories and much more coming up on this edition of From the Forest. Happy Friday the 13th, everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. I hope you've all had a great week, and before we start today's episode, I'd like to thank Mary for their support and generosity. And if you haven't already, please consider following, sharing, and reviewing the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to find the show. You can also support us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries. or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. And if you'd like to share your paranormal encounter on the podcast, you can submit your story through email at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And all these links can be found in the show notes. And now, let's see what tonight has in store for us. Tonight's first listener experience comes to us from Jandy, and Jandy's story is called Forest Stories. Jandy says, "Dear Nick, I'm so glad you started this thread of weird forest stories. As always, I love listening to your podcast, and thank you for the platform and safe space to make our stories heard. The following story was recently told to me by my mother, who is 81. It took place in central southern Cuba more than 70 years ago. My mom was born in Cuba and had some very interesting events happen to her father in 1945 while he was working in a logging camp alongside a dozen or more men. They were harvesting pine trees in the forest located in south-central Cuba. The men would leave their homes and work for many weeks, and so they stayed at a camp close to where they were cutting down trees. The nearest town was Vertientes, a quiet and rural town. In that era, Cuba was a very safe place to live. This was many years prior to the Castro regime taking over. My mom told me that my grandfather was earning a good living logging, and he was able to buy some farmland near this town so that he could move his whole family there and continue working. Things were going great, until suddenly one of the workers vanished during his shift. The other men noticed that he did not return to camp that night. The next day he was still missing, so they began searching the woods and found nothing. At first, the other men thought that maybe the worker just quit because the work was too hard for him, or he just decided to leave without saying anything to anyone. But all of his belongings were still at the camp, and the only way back was by vehicle. A few days later, a second man went missing under the same circumstances. Upon searching the work site, there were no signs of a struggle, nor signs of an animal attack. There were no noises or screams when it happened, no blood or other signs of foul play. They just vanished. I should explain that there are no large predators like cougars or bear in Cuba. There were absolutely no signs of a struggle or foul play. Nothing. This continued to go on until a total of 3 workmen went missing without a trace. My grandfather was a quiet, hard-working man who never spoke much about what had happened in the woods. He resigned his position and quickly sold his farm without telling my grandmother his reasons, until many years later. The owner and the foreman of the logging company were forced to cease logging in that area, since none of the remaining men wished to go back into the forest. They all resigned before more lives were lost. The authorities were unable to find the missing men, nor did they come up with any explanations. Oddly enough, my grandfather was blessed with a gift of healing in his later years. He knew what herbs and plants had healing or cleansing abilities. He never had any formal training, but he developed almost shaman-like abilities. He began healing people spiritually and physically, and this was something that he developed spontaneously. Well, that's my story, Nick. I hope your listeners enjoyed it. Thank you for all you do for this community. God bless you and keep you safe, always. Sincerely, Jandy. Our next story of the night comes to us from Mouse, and Mouse's story is called Invisible Creature. Mouse says, "Hello, I have been listening to your podcast for a bit. I have been living with paranormal experiences my entire 36 years of life. I have enough experiences of my own and stories of my family's that I could fill a novel. But I would like to share this one that sticks out the most, and this is all pre-cell phones. When I was 9, my 2 sisters and I were in the park. My oldest sister was learning to hit with a baseball, and my 10-year-old sister was learning to pitch, and I was just retrieving the ball. One time the ball was hit into a grove of trees, and I ran in to get it. I picked the ball up and looked around, and I saw an invisible shape. At first I thought it was a coyote. It slowly moved away and out of the trees, backing away from me. I can only explain the invisibility as looking like the Predator's invisible shield from the movie. It was that almost pixelated and see-through look, yet you can see the outline of what is there. It was either crouched down, or it was a 4-legged being. My sisters then called for me, and I backed out and ran to them, and they immediately wanted to go home. I asked if they had seen what had gone out of the trees before me, but they said they saw nothing. But I found out years later that they had lied. They couldn't explain what it was, and they don't believe in the paranormal. But they did try to explain it to my mom that day. I'm 36 now and never forgot about it. I still go there because I live 5 minutes walk from that park. I never saw it again, or anything like it. That was my strangest encounter. I love everyone else's encounters thus far, and stay safe. Thank you for your time, and as I've said, I have enough experiences to fill a novel, from ghosts to witches to UFOs, scary to funny. Stay spooky, Mouse. Our next experience comes to us from Martine, and Martine's story is called Odd Experience in the Woods. Martine says, "Hello Nick, I hope you are doing well. I've listened to your podcast since last October when I was looking for something to listen to while working in a Halloween store. This story is short and is more like me looking for help to identify what I and my friend saw in the woods. I have a photo of it too if there is somewhere I can send it. Anyway, here is the experience. I and my friend regularly like to go exploring, and we usually do it late at night. On one of our explorations, we were in a very small town in Wisconsin, and we noticed there was a path into the woods that surrounded the town. So we went in. We walked pretty deep into it and eventually went off trail, which was probably not that smart. While we were looking for a way out in the pitch black with our flashlights, I noticed a weirdly shaped stone on the floor, and I pointed it out to my friend, and we went over to it. It appeared to be a rock, shaped exactly like a girl lying face up, with her arms out almost like the chalk outline of a dead body. But upon closer inspection, the thing definitely was not naturally occurring. It almost looked like poured cement because the hair was sculpted and the nipples on the breasts were also sculpted. It's better if I can show you guys the picture that I have of it. I tried looking up information about what it could be, like maybe a memorial for someone that had died there or something, but I haven't been able to find anything. Anyway, thanks for reading this. I hope you find it interesting, and you can use it for your In the Woods themed episodes, so someone might know something about what it is. I have other stories as well that are weirder, including things with demons, ghosts, and doppelgangers. I will send these in the future. Thanks again for reading this, and for the community that you've built. Have a good rest of your day. Martine. For anyone interested in seeing Martine's picture, I will add it to our forum, and there will be a link in the show notes. Our next story of the night comes to us from Foxy, and Foxy's story is called The Black Dog. Foxy says, "Hi there, I recently found your podcast and love it. I've always been interested in the paranormal ever since an experience I had when I was 8, but I won't talk about that experience now. What I will talk about is the experience that I had when I was 14. I had forgotten about it until I saw what I had seen that night again recently. My grandfather had always been superstitious, and some of that may have rubbed off on me. He used to joke that there was a chupacabra in the forest around where we lived, and I have to admit that if you were in the woods at night, it felt overbearingly oppressive and frightening. but I always thought it was just my imagination, until that night. It was hot and our AC wasn't working, so I had a window open and a fan on. Some friends had come over to stay the night, and we were in my room. My friends were asleep, but I felt like something was watching me, and I couldn't sleep. Sitting there, drawing calm to myself, I heard a scream from the woods across the road from my house. I thought it was a panther. We had heard of one being seen in the area, and my parents always told me about how panthers can make a noise that sounded like a woman screaming. So I thought that's what it was. But that feeling worsened, and something drew my eyes to the open window and across the road. Standing there at the edge of the woods was a huge black shape. It was dark outside, but this thing was darker than the shadows around it, its eyes glowing red. That was the only thing I could make out, its piercing red eyes. We stared at each other before a truck rumbled past, and it was gone. And after that, the nightmares started. I would see my family being hurt or killed, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, crying, shaking, and unable to breathe. They continued until I was 18, when I moved to another state to live with my boyfriend. Things slowly got back to normal, and that encounter faded from my memory, until a few nights ago. I had to take my dog out before we laid down for bed. I was standing outside my apartment complex, letting my dog do his business, when I heard that scream again. Suddenly, that overwhelming feeling of being watched washed over me. I looked across the parking lot and froze, my dog pulling at his leash and barking. There stood the same creature I had seen that night all those years ago. It just stood there staring at me, but I got a better look at it. It looked like a black wolf, except its eyes were glowing red. The city bus was running its final pass for the night and passed between me and the creature, and when the bus left and I could see again, the creature was gone. The nightmares have started again, and I find myself not wanting to sleep, but this time I'm not seeing people I care about being hurt or killed. This time, it's me. I talked to a shaman from the tribe my mother descends from, and he told me about black dogs, and the description he gave was exactly what I saw that night. I don't go out at night anymore, fearing that I'll see it again, but there are nights when I hear that scream again, and it sends chills down my spine. Our next story of the night comes to us from Eric, and Eric's story is called Donner Pass. Eric says, I've never told this story but to a handful of very close friends, because frankly it sounds like a bad acid trip or something, but no drugs or drinking were involved. My buddy and I, I'll call him Red, were driving from Vegas down to a small town in California called Sonora. We went the back way, so it brought us close to Lake Tahoe, then over Donner Pass and down through several high-altitude campgrounds and then small towns before the pass ends in Sonora. It was just dusk when we passed the unholy spot, and then the campgrounds. Campfires were burning, and every street and Forest Service sign reflected brightly in our headlights. Then we passed the many small towns coming down the hill. We could plainly see house lights and street lights burning bright, as it was now almost fully dark. We got into Sonora at around 8 p.m., got some supplies for a night of camping, and headed back up the pass to those lively campgrounds. But as soon as we got out of town, the atmosphere was different. We could see no lights anywhere. The forest was like a wall of blackness on both sides of us, and we kept looking but could not find any of the turnoffs that go into all those small towns. Just nothing. Black, dark, nothing. We got to the campgrounds and they were gated and locked, and no camper vehicles or tents were visible, and no fires were burning. We started to freak out a bit. We turned around in a hurry and started back to Sonora. Then alongside of the roads every few miles, there were people, I think, in gray full-length hooded robes, walking in straight lines along the side of the road. Then we noticed that the first person in line would lay down motionless on the ground, and the rest of the line would then continue on without them. We saw this several times. We finally found a Forest Service post where employees lived in a circle of trailers around a firehouse type of building. Here all the lights were on, TVs were flickering, but none of the doors we knocked on were answered. We then pulled off on a little side road that ended at another gate that led deep into the woods. We stopped freaking out and started to doze off as it had been a long day of driving. But as soon as we dozed off, our windshield was lit brightly by headlights that appeared to be from unmarked Ford Limited Crown Victorias, speeding at us from several directions, and spotlighting us as well. We started the car as fast as we could, and we peeled out of the little Forest Service village and back onto the highway. When we reached it, we immediately saw another line of robed figures. We didn't take a second look to see anyone lie down, and to our great surprise, we were not pursued by anyone, nor were there any headlights in the forest in that direction. We put the pedal down and went way too fast down that grade and around those turns, and then, about 15 miles from Sonora, we started to see house lights from the many residents there, and our lights started to reflect off of street signs and guardrails again. Then we passed by the many off-roads leading to all those small communities that we previously could not find, and by the time we rolled back into Sonora, all was back to normal. We eventually pulled into a Walmart parking lot and slept there until morning. Red and I never spoke of it. I tried, but he would just shut the conversation down as if his brain would not allow him to approach the memory. So after many, many years of review and wondering if I had gone temporarily crazy, I have settled on the hypothesis of a dimensional slip of some kind. We were somewhere we weren't supposed to be, and seeing things we weren't meant to see. I think we may have been very close to being a missing 411 statistic. Thank you so much for your show, and allowing people like me to air to the world a story like this with as little judgment as possible. Have a great week. Our next story of the night comes to us from Lay, and Lay's story is called White Lady and the Swamp. Lay says, "Hey Nick, this is a story that my father told me, but he passed away a few years ago, so I will try to reconstruct the story from what I have been able to remember. And believe me, it's a memorable one. I will narrate from his perspective, so everyone will have a clear view of everything." This happened when I was a freshman in high school. I was maybe 15, but I remember it very clearly. I was one of the scouts in a small mountain town at the time, and taking advantage of that, the chaperones would often organize trips for us into the mountains. I loved the mountains. Life always seemed more beautiful there, and the close contact with nature made it even better, or maybe it was the reason for such an impression. Anyway, because of this, I never missed an opportunity to go hiking, and one summer day we set off with the scouts for another adventure. We were accompanied by 2 chaperones and a guide who knew the area and led us along the forest paths. This was a few days after a massive windstorm that, as you might have guessed, had knocked down several trees, and some of them had fallen on the trail. So far, everything was going according to plan, until finally we came to a fork where we should have turned right, but it was impossible because of a collapsed big branch. The guide said that it had been a few years since he had walked the path turning left, so he, one chaperone, and a couple of boys from the group would go to see if it was safe, and the rest would wait for them at the fork. So I stayed. We waited like that for about 15 minutes and no one came back, until we finally saw someone heading our way. However, it was no one from our group. Indeed, this was not anyone you would expect to find in the high mountains, far from any mountain hut. We saw a woman with long dark hair in a white flowing dress down to her ankles, carrying a several-month-old baby in her arms. She told us not to go there because we would fall into a dangerous swamp, and that our friends could use some help. So we thanked the woman for the information, and without wondering what she was doing there with the baby, we ran to help the rest of the group. In fact, several people were stuck in the swamp, and there weren't enough of those untouched to help everyone. When we got the situation under control, we asked, "Hey, was there a woman walking by?" But they just looked at each other and said, no one else was walking that way. It seemed strange to me because there was only one road from the swamp to where we were waiting without any forks, and in addition there was no path behind the swamp. Besides, how would she know that they needed help if she didn't pass them by? For that moment, however, I decided to ignore it and get busy getting back on trail. We returned to the subject of the mystery woman when everyone had recovered from nearly drowning in the swamp. The guide asked about her appearance, and we told him, this time in detail, what we had seen. He seemed unmoved until he heard about the baby in the woman's arms. Stunned, he told us there was a legend circulating in the area about a white lady who once drowned in the swamp with her child, and now walks around the mountains warning hikers of danger. As with paranormal stories, not everyone believed. For me, however, it was the only possible option. Either way, whoever it is, some scouts owe their lives to her. Thanks for reading. I have a few more of my father's stories to tell, and I hope to do so soon. Be safe out there. Lay. Our next story of the night comes to us from James, and James' story is called Alien Bigfoot. James says, "Hello. I recently discovered your podcast and thoroughly enjoy and relate to many of the stories shared, because I too have some stories to share, ones that I've personally experienced. I am currently a research analyst with the University of Minnesota Medical School. I have a bachelor's of science in neuroscience and another in psychology. These understandings of the universe are all good and serve a purpose, but I firmly believe the human nature of science is limiting, at times flawed by ego and desire to prove a point, sometimes at the expense of accurately portraying evidence in its most unobjective light. Being in a research position, I can see how it's possible how at times human bias can sneak into the science. That being said, I don't want to discredit any institution or science in general, but rather merely pose this caveat. Science is only as meaningful as the experience and intention of those who communicate it. I guess you could say that my day-to-day life is less paranormal and more rooted in the normality of man, but this does not fully capture, in my mind, the ultimate reality of our universe. I was also raised Catholic, but even with this diverse science and religion background, I know this is only a small picture of what the universe is in essence. So when the topic of the paranormal pops up, so many factors and contributions can be pulled from to describe it. The science, the psychology, the theology, and more interestingly, the factors yet to be fully explained. Or a step further, factors yet to be accepted. Sometimes the accepted reality does not match up with actuality. This being said, I'll start with my experience I had when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I was raised on a small hobby farm. My sister and my mother were painting by number a rendition of the Last Supper in the kitchen when they asked me to take out the trash. The sun had already set. The twilight made most things visible, but those at the end of the horizon would fade into a gray darkness. In the center of our farm was a large telephone pole light that would illuminate the front of our yard. But beyond this, your eyes would need to adjust to the twilight as you would leave the safety of the light. You should know, out in the country, the trash was not simply a short walk down the driveway like it might be for your city listeners. Our trash was located about 1/10 of a mile from the house to where our gravel driveway would meet the paved road. I remember skipping, talking to myself, somewhat lost in a giddy song as I walked with pep, the bag of trash in hand. When I had already dropped off the trash, I was still deep in my banter as I had begun my walk back. I was alone in the creeping darkness. As I approached the light from the yard pole, I could see past our old red barn the rolling hills of field corn and how the horizon would blend into the tree line of our woods. Harvest must have been in progress because a single path of corn behind the barn was already down, maybe 150 feet away. It was here in which I noticed something walking, or so I thought. I stopped whistling and stood in place, squinting to get a better look through the change in lighting. What I could then see, as clear as day, was a gray, furry, two-legged creature, walking upright, with curled hands swinging with each stride. I thought it must have been an animal of some kind at first, but then I realized that there are no two-legged animals that stood about 6 feet tall in western Wisconsin. I stood puzzled, unafraid at first, but confused. I was immobilized by curiosity. When its head turned my way, however, I caught a green or yellow glare of its eyes. It was a combination of a deer in headlights or a snake hypnotizing its prey. It was looking directly at me. This eye contact may have only lasted a solid second, but something about it was unsettling. What actually began to scare me was the fact that after this eye contact, the creature's walk instantly turned to a sprint. It was fast, and it soon disappeared behind the barn. At this, terrified and perplexed, I ran for the door, and I feared that it might be circling around the barn to meet me. I didn't even take a step to the porch. In a single bound, I leaped up 4 steps, ran inside, shut the door, and locked it behind me, panting. My heavy breathing wasn't from the run, but rather the shaky, uncontrolled feeling I had at the sight of this creature. When I tried to explain the short series of events to my family, I had trouble finding the words, and when I did find the words, no one believed me. The next day I convinced my father to investigate the area with me, but of course we didn't find much, but perhaps a vague indentation in the dirt, which could have been a print or series of prints. It didn't help that my dad had bad eyes, but I know what I saw. To this day I remember it vividly, and in my mind it was some combination of typical depictions of Bigfoot, or a furry alien. For the next year or so, I had other isolated experiences of fear, at times a feeling of the presence of something sinister, but this event truly stands out as something so visually obvious and unexplainable. I could not merely shake it off. I hope this first story is something relatable to your listeners. I have more stories to tell, but tonight I'll leave it there. I wonder though, have you or any other listeners ever experienced something similar? Was it a Bigfoot? An alien? Some combination? If so, I'd love to connect. Perhaps you could connect me to your listeners if they have had a similar sighting. I have other experiences and would love the chance to discuss. Thank you for the work that you do with this podcast. I hope to connect again. Your friend, James. After sharing this encounter with me, James and I have been in contact several times, and he had additional thoughts regarding his first story. And he had this to say. Call it serendipity, but just now I listened to episode 106. At timestamp 1506, the story describes nearly exactly what I saw and shared with you prior. Reflective yellow eyes, upright, furry. In fact, the dog-like description is a great depiction as well. Perhaps it was a Dogman sighting after all, but I hadn't known what to call it. I distinctly remember its hands curled back, and now that I think of it, it could have very well been long claws. I called it an alien Bigfoot in my story, but this story was strikingly similar to what this person described in their recounting. I've added a link to episode 106 in the show notes for anyone that would like to hear the story that James is referencing. As we come to the end of tonight's edition of From the Forest, I appreciate all of you for tuning in, and a special thank you goes out to Jandy, Mouse, Martine, Foxy, Eric, Lay, and James for sharing their experiences. And if you've had a paranormal experience that occurred in or near the forest, you can contact me through email, voice message, or on our website, and these links can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe Friday the 13th and a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday with our next episode. From everyone at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.